Okay, well, I am going to start reviewing them. I'm going to review it by class, and then rarities probably, So Druid cards, Raven, Idol, 1 mana, it's a Discover. It's kind of like, reminds me of Tracking in a way when I see this card. I guess when I saw this, I thought a lot about Discover and the strength of it. So just for some clarification for people, Discover a minion means you only can get minions that are possible for you to get as, say, a Druid. So you'll never get a Rogue minion, and when you discover a spell, you only get Druid spells. I feel like that makes it much better than I originally thought. Raven Idol, especially discovering a spell, means that since Druid, I'm not sure how many spells there are exactly, but my estimate is something around 20 spells. You actually have a very good shot at discovering a certain type of spell you want, maybe like a Wall Growth or a Swipe or a Starfall, like maybe like an AoE type thing. So discovering a spell, there's not that much pool to choose from. You can choose 3 out of the 20 or 3 out of, say, 15. You have a fairly good chance of getting something you want. There's some precedents of cards like this in Constructed, like Tracking, and we're definitely not surprised to see Tracking when anyone uses Tracking. It's just not really in any deck. I feel like the hardest thing for Raven Idol to be put in decks is like finding a slot for it, because it'll never really hurt you too badly to put in a Raven Idol, but it's just hard to find a slot for the Raven Idol card. It's a fairly flexible like Tracking type card. It's just whether you can fit it in. So I think it's maybe okay. I think it's okay. I just want to clarify that my card review will be basically going to do it purely on Constructed. It's not going to be Arena at all. Alright, going to the next card, Mounted Raptor. One thing I'm going to be talking a lot about is what decks each cards can fit in and what cards they're in competition from. So looking at this slot, it's like it's basically a Shredder, Paladin Shredder with 1 less mana and Death Rattle 1 less. Basically, it's just like everything 1 less on a Shredder, and then it's a beast. So if you make everything 1 less, I feel like it'll be worse. Like Shredder is better than this, but what I'm really excited for Mounted Raptor is looking at the card slots in Druid. Druids have very weak 3-drops. It's like a weak slot for mid-range Druid, or I guess any kind of Druid. We don't have very many options as Druid players, and Druid players mostly end up just using, say, combination of Shades and Big Game Hunters for their 3-drop slots. Shade isn't exactly that great. Like, you don't really see many other decks use Shade. It's only just because Druids have like Savage Roar, but it's not just that. It's Druids just don't have anything better on 3. So I think Mounted Raptor is a very good card, just because there's very few cards competing with it. It obviously doesn't really compete with Big Game Hunter, so. And I do think it's better than Harvest Golem. If you look at the ratio, I think 3-2 is better than 2-3. If like on a Death Rattle minion, so in general, I would assume that 2-3 might be better even on turn 3. But on a Death Rattle minion, it's much better to have high threat. So like Shredder would be worse as a 3-4, Highmane would be worse as a 5-6, things like that, because Death Rattle minions are hard to kill for your opponent. And if your opponent's not killing, you'd rather be doing more damage. Round 1 cost mains mostly around 1-2, 2-1. You occasionally get something worse, and you occasionally get like Flame Imp or 1-3, like a Mana Worm or Void Caller, Void Walker. I think this is one of the very good card. And Druids have been getting more and more early game. Druids usually be very weak in the early game, all reliant on ramp, but they've been recently getting a lot of good early game minions. Jungle Moonkin. 4 mana, 4/4. Both players have spell damage. I didn't say the last card's a beast, but they're both beasts. I mean, let's just say it's okay. I feel like Druid is one of the better scaling classes for spell power, just because of Swipe. Spell power with any cheap AoE spells or any AoE makes spell power very powerful. In particular, Jungle Moonkin gives both players spell power, spell damage +2. Druid isn't really the best. You definitely have to consider what you're giving other classes, though, because I think Rogue is better than Druid as spell damage. Like, Rogue is the only class that uses Blood Mage realistically right now, just because Rogue likes spell power that much, and Double Azure Drake is super common in a Rogue. So if you're fighting a Rogue player, this could hurt you. One thing is you can combo this on the same turn, but judging by recent innovations of deck building, let's say, it's very hard to have cards like combo only, you know. For minions like this you want to drop on turn 4. If you want to save, like, say, Blood Mage swipe for turn 6 or Azure Drake swipe for turn 9, it's very hard for you to, you know, design decks where your minion isn't really a 4-drop, it's more of a situational card for late game combo or like a big game hunter type card. And you can only have so many of those slots, and for now, like, everyone is using Force Nature Savager and Druids, like pretty much every Druid. That's already kind of like 2 combo cards, so if you're trying to combo like Force Nature and Savager, and you're trying to combo Jungle Moonkin Swipe, if you want to use this card as kind of like a not a 4-drop, but kind of like a comboing with Swipe or something, you know, your deck falls apart because then you don't have anything to do anymore. So I'm thinking this is not a very good card, at least in the current metagame. I don't think it fits in any deck. I'd rather, if I have to like keep 3 or 4 cards in my hand, not play them unless I'm gonna combo cards, I'd rather keep Force Nature Savager because I think that's much stronger. And this card has too much downsides and it's too unreliable. And it's a 4-mana 4/4. So Dart Trap. When an opposing hero power is used, deal 5 damage to random enemies. This is a Hunter's Secret. I feel like this card has a lot of competition because of how strong Snake Trap is, how strong Freezing Trap is, and how strong Explosive Trap is. So even though Dart Trap seems good, just like Bear Trap seemed good at first, the competition of Dart Trap is so high, especially Freezing Trap. Like, Freezing Trap is like a game-changing secret. It's so powerful. It doesn't just deal 5 damage to random enemy. Freezing Trap doesn't deal damage, but Freezing Trap pushes so much tempo, and I feel like it's very hard for anything to compete with that, and mostly you are competing with that just because of Mad Scientist as Hunter, and, you know, sometimes people use other secrets other than Freezing Trap, but it's mostly because, you know, in tournaments maybe it's a little bit too obvious if all your secrets are the same, or, you know, in ladder, also you have some incentive to use 2 secrets, just because if you play 2 Mad Scientists and die at the same time, for example, if you have both Freezing Traps, that doesn't work. Or if you have a Freezing Trap already and then you play Mad Scientist. So, you know, for the most part, it's like 2 Freezing Traps, 1 other trap, and I don't think Dark Trap will do it as far as how good it goes. Desert Camel, common, 3 mana, 2/4 beast. So the interesting thing about this card is Hunters are a class that almost always uses 1-cost minions. You know, for the most part, it's not exactly super common for every deck to use 1-cost minions. I can think of a lot of decks that don't have any 1-cost minions, like Handlock, Control Warrior, maybe like Druids, for example, unless you're running like the Leper Gnome variation. At that point, I feel like what would happen is only you would get the minion, they wouldn't get anything, in which case this card is very good. You get a lot of value from Desert Camel into Web Spinner, and then when the Web Spinner dies, you get another minion. That's just like so much. It's so much fuel for you to, like, it's like so much stuff for you to do as a Hunter player when that happens, when you're getting a Web Spinner. And at that point you can load your deck with like kill commands, Hunter's Marks, Unleash the Hounds, so things that are situational cards, and you can kind of rely on your Desert Camels and your Web Spinners to pull out your, say, your on curve proactive cards a lot. So I think this is a pretty cool card. It has some competition with Animal Companion just because Animal Companion is so good, but for the most part, you know, Hunters generally want a little bit more than just Animal Companions. Eaglehorn Bow is kind of another card where you can play on turn 3 almost no matter what, but I think that Hunters would like to use 1 or 2 more 3-drop proactive cards, and Desert Camel seems pretty good. 2/4 is actually okay. It doesn't do that much damage, but it's sticky for Houndmaster is, I guess, a consideration. And for the most part, I would assume that Desert Camel is used more of a mid-range deck than a face Hunter. I mean, you could get Enemy Zombie Chow, but I'd say it could be. It's a fairly viable card. That's a nice little puzzle for us to solve, whether we want to use it in mid-range Hunter. Explorer's Hat, give a minion +1/+1 death rattle, add an Explorer's Hat to your hand. So this card is basically like a recurring buff. You can play it on a minion. When it dies, it comes back to your hand. It's weak to silence, and you'll never be able to play it, for the most part, more than once a turn, I guess, unless you're willing to trade multiple minions into one thing. I don't feel like this is strong, and I feel like if it does find a home in Hunter, it would have to be as another archetype. I feel like this could have some synergy with like Feign Death, for example. Like we see some kind of like Baron Rivendare plus Dreadseed decks where you get like infinite amounts of Dreadseed. You can kind of see like Explorer's Hats like duplicating in a Feign Death deck, I think, but I don't think it's good enough to use in a standard mid-range or aggro Hunter. The effect is too weak and too slow over multiple turns, so like 1 Explorer's Hat every turn. You know, there is some precedence for cards that have infinite value, and one of them is Headcrack, I believe, from Rogue. It almost kind of reminds me of Headcrack, because you're kind of like playing it once per turn and giving a minion +1/+1 if that minion dies, but you know, Headcrack is almost never used. I don't think this will be used unless it's in maybe a Feign Death deck. Forgotten Torch, deal 3 damage, shuffle a Roaring Torch in your deck that deals 6 damage. I just want to bring this up so people know. I already know what it does, but it's a 3 mana for 6 damage. So this is basically the other card in your deck. It shuffles that into your deck. It turns your deck into kind of like a 31 card deck after you use it. I feel in Constructed this card. There's a lot of hype for this card. I feel it might not be the best just because stiff competition in Frostbolt and Firebolt. It's weaker, like the first half is weaker than Frostbolt, second half slightly better than Firebolt, but another thing is I don't feel like Mage really runs out of value. Like this is a card where, you know, if you really want to get the most out of this card, there's basically 2 reasons to use this card. One is if you want more value in your deck, like a 31 card deck, so you don't lose in fatigue. And the second reason is for like weird reasons, kind of like how Mysterious Challenger thins your deck. You know, if you want to draw the burn at the end of the game, kind of, it's like 2 burn spells but 1 spell, and you don't get the second one until you use the first one. So there's this like tiny incentive on that end where you'd rather, like, a benefit of Forgotten Torches, it kind of like makes you maybe draw more minions early and draw the burn spells later, which is sometimes what you want. Oftentimes, especially for a deck like Freeze Mage, but overall, looking at the upsides and downsides, I feel like it's a little bit too weak for, in my opinion. I wouldn't be super interested in putting this in any of my constructed decks unless it's maybe Freeze Mage, and then I have to think of like maybe do some testing, but I don't feel it's super good for Freeze Mage either. Ethereal Conjurer. This is a 5 mana 6/3 Battlecry Discover spell. You only get Mage spells, so Mage has some decent spells. I think this is actually a fairly decent card for Tempo Mage and not for Control Mages. Control Mages have too much competition for this slot. There's Anti-Killbot, Sludge Belcher, like Lotheb, and maybe something like Harrison Jones. And the 6/3 is incredibly offensive as far as like minion ratios go, like as a 6/3. But I could see this being good in a Tempo Mage because on turn 5, you should be fairly sure about what you want at that point. You know, whether you want to fish for like a Blizzard or Flame Strike in the next couple turns, or whether you want to fish for some kind of like burn spells like Fireball, Frostbolt, Pyroblast, or even this, you know, Forgotten Torch kind of card. And Mage has a lot of synergy with spells right now, so, and also there's nothing that's like super good for Tempo Mage to use on turn 5, and a lot of people just like to use Azure Drake. 6/3 and 4/4 is fairly close as far as like bodies go, and Battlecry, as far as draw a card and discover a spell, are pretty close. I think it's fairly close to an Azure Drake on that kind of level of power for aggressive decks. It's definitely much more scary to leave up as a 6/3 does so much damage without spell power, but I think it's actually pretty alright, and I'd be willing to try it in Tempo Mage. Animated Armor, 4 mana 4/4. The hero can only take 1 damage at a time. I think when I first saw this card, I wasn't too excited about it. It's like 4 mana 4/4. Maybe let's say Taunt. That doesn't seem that good, but in some way it's worse than a Taunter because it doesn't protect your other minions. So like say you have a Flamewaker hiding behind Animated Armor, it won't actually protect your Flamewaker, but on the other hand, it protects you from spells and say direct damage, which taunts don't protect you from. And 4/4 is kind of better than 3/5. If you're playing, I guess like the deck that you would really want to use this is in some kind of Control Mage, just because Control Mage doesn't rely on minions to protect. Like there's no Knife Jugglers or Flamewakers in Control Mage. You might want to play an Animated Armor over Ascension. It would help more against Hunter Hero Power and Burn. So this is an interesting card, but I would only really be willing to test in a Control Mage, and Control Mage has been fairly weak recently. It's kind of a cool card though if you're willing to play that deck, like maybe Echo Giants or something. It has to compete with Water Elemental and maybe Senjin or Shredder, but I don't feel like it will be played in any of the super popular Mage decks, basically Tempo Mage and Freeze Mage. Sacred Trial, when your opponent has at least 3 minions and plays another, destroys it, so basically on their 4th minion. I don't think this is that good, even though the obvious implication is that it's another secret for Mysterious Challenger. Mysterious Challenger is capped at 5 secrets. You cannot get a 6th secret for Mysterious Challenger. so you had to replace one of your Seekers with Sacred Trial, and I feel like at that point it's too like too situational. Like oftentimes you can play a whole game without ever playing a third, like a fourth minion after a third minion. I don't really see any deck that it would really belong to, or any deck where you would really want to build around Sacred Trial. I think it's just too situational. And also, as far as Mysterious Challenger goes, if you're putting two of these in your deck and your opponent never gets the first one, you don't even get the like you don't even get the second one after. Keeper of Uldaman, 4 mana for 3/4 Battlecry, set of minions attack and health to 3. Now, it seems like the Paladin cards are kind of weak because Paladin's really strong right now. This card might be it's probably the best Paladin card of this set, but I don't feel like it's that good. So I guess one of the things is you want to look at a couple cases here. One of the cases you buff a Silverhand Recruit, which is best case scenario as far as you buffing your minions, and you're getting a 3/3 Silverhand Recruit, so you're getting +2/+2, which means that it's a 4 mana for a 5/6 with, say, some of it being a charge effect, which is very powerful. But if you think about it, like, not all your minions are going to be Silverhand Recruits. Like, I guess you can have Muster into Keeper of Uldaman, but it's like fairly situational at that point. If you're ever getting like a mini bot or a juggler, it's not really usable. On the other end, you can debuff your opponent's bigger minions to 3/3. One of the cool little implications late game, if you're ever in top deck war, this is a 3/4, so it kind of perfectly counters the 3/3. So like, say someone plays like Deathwing and then you play Keeper of Uldaman, you like beat the 3/3 after. But Paladins already have a lot of competition for slots like that. There's Equality and there's Elder Peacekeeper, and it's very hard to fit in a lot of cards in that slot. Equality is already so powerful, and Peacekeeper's already so powerful, maybe even more so. And this doesn't really help your minions trade into it. It's like it deals with one big minion. I would find it fairly hard using your opponent's minions, so I think it'll be more used on your own Silverhand Recruits. But ultimately, 4-drop is a slot that Paladin's very competitive in. I know I was gonna say this a lot when I started, but 4-drop is Paladin's one of Paladin's strong slots with True Silver and Consecrate, and then there's the standard like Shredders right now, so definitely an interesting card. I'd say it's even a good card, but it's not a great card. Anyfin Can Happen, 10 mana, 7 Murlocs that die this game. So Murloc Knight is a Murloc. I mean, for the most part, I guess I would say this is not that good, just because it's so hard for you to use a 10 mana card. You have to have 7 Murlocs out on the field. Like if you don't have 7 Murlocs that died this game, I think you just don't get anything, or you don't get the amount of Murlocs that died. I don't really have that much to say about this card other than it's like, while it's all cool and stuff, I don't know. I can't see really any deck that would want to use this. I don't feel like 2 Murloc Knights can support anything can happen. Even though Murloc Knights do generate more Murlocs, you can't always rely on drawing both Murloc Knights before anything can happen. I feel like you would definitely want to run a dedicated Murloc list, and then you're running a 10-drop in a Murloc list. I just want to get some clarification. Do you guys think that this works on your opponent's Murlocs? So, if your opponents played Murlocs and they died, you get them? Or is it just your Murlocs? It wouldn't make sense for it to res your opponent's Murlocs on their side. Either way, though, I don't feel like it's that good. Okay, so apparently it is your opponent's Murlocs, but I don't really think it changes too much. So, okay, Museum Curator. 2 mana for 1/2 Discover Death Rattle cards. Kind of like a Novice Engineer back in the day when Novice Engineer was a 1/2. Death Rattle cards actually are quite good. Like, if you look at playable minions in Hearthstone, Death Rattles have a very high proportion of playable cards. You have like Hunt Creeper, Harvest Golem, kind of playable, Shredder, Karen, Sylvanas, Pod Sky Golem. Especially if you can choose one of 3, you can almost always, I feel like you'll almost always get a Death Rattle card that's constructed playable, or, like one of the good constructed cards instead of going down into the arena tier list. And priests, other than Dragon's Priests, priests don't have any good 2-drops so they can play on turn 2. It's always been one of Priest's weaknesses. I do think that this is a good card for control priests, just because it gives them something to do on turn 2. Priest is the only class, I think, in the game where your hero power doesn't do anything sometimes. All other hero powers, at least you can use on turn 2 and it'll do something, like even Mage, like pinging them in the face or something. Priest, unless you take damage, like, it just, sometimes you just don't do anything on turn 2. So having a good proactive 2-drop for Priest is very good. Obviously, the problem is like late game if you're running Museum Curator, just so 2 mana 1/2, low impact card, but yeah, I wouldn't compare it to Novice Engineer anymore, just because at this point it's on another level. Like 1/2 is so much different than 1/1. Novice Engineer was one of the best cards in the game as a 1/1. It was just like totally unused as a 1/1. So I'm pretty excited about this card. It's pretty good. Entomb, choose an enemy minion, shuffle it into your deck. It's like a kind of like a reverse sap. It's maybe like a polymorph for Hex. You know, it kills it basically. Even kills Death Rattle minions and shuffles into your deck. Ultimately, looking at like Hearthstone meta, like I don't feel like shuffling into your deck is a huge thing, and I don't think that you'd really want to pay 6 mana just to remove Death Rattles. But Priest already has so many like combo cards together as Control Priest. Even it's hard to fit in like double deaths, and Priest already has like Light Bombs and Alkanized Circles, all this kind of thing. I don't think that this is that good. I wouldn't like this card, personally. You can always think of good situations for it, like against Savannah Hyman, against like probably Sky Golem, Sylvanas to stop Death Rattle. But you could just be loading your deck with more Light Bombs, and Light Bomb is so good already for Priest. It does much more, I think. Excavated Evil, deal 3 damage to all minions, shuffle this card into your opponent's deck. Shuffling this card into your opponent's deck, I don't know if that's good or bad thing. It could be like priests, even control priests do rely on taking minion control. It's not like something like Control Warrior maybe it would make more sense, like deal 3 damage to all minions, shuffle this card in your opponent's deck, then when your opponent draws, Excavate Evil as a Control Warrior. If you're a Control Warrior, they have nothing to use it on. Priest always has to like take board control eventually, even control priests. So I don't even know if the second half of it is a good, like an upside or a downside. Almost feels like these things are just whatever. They're not a big effect either way. Deal 3 damage to all minions is pretty strong, but it has competition with like Shaman, Light Bomb, and Holy Nova. And Holy Nova is so this card might be better than Holy Nova in Control Priest, but much worse in Dragon Priest. And even in Control Priest, I'm not sure. I think Holy Nova might still be better because it heals. It's a card that I don't think it's that good. Tomb Pillager, 4 mana 5/4, Death Rattle, add a coin to your hand. There's a lot of 4 mana 5/4s already. There's a 4 mana 5/4 Taunt that they added, and there's like 4 mana 5/4 Beast. There's a 4 mana 5/4 Panda that returns a card. So this is a one where like adding a coin to your hand is the obvious advantage. Like those are all kind of like situational stuff, but I don't think that this is that good. Rogue's 4-drop slots are fairly competitive, and Rogue non-battle cry slots are really competitive because Rogue is the class that really relies on pushing to like tempo, like killing their minion while developing your minion at the same turn, and then using cards like Sap and Backstab and things like that to make sure that you can keep the board control and kill them with a couple of minions. And I don't think that Tomb Pillager really helps on that much. It could just be that I'm undervaluing a coin for Rogue because coin is very powerful for Rogue, but you have to give up like a Shredder or a Violet Teacher. And Violet Teacher is so good when you have like preps and backstabs and stuff like that. So personally, I don't think Tomb Pillager is that good. Pit Snake, destroy any minion damaged by this minion, so it's like a Patient Assassin for 1 less mana, 1 more damage, and non-stealth. I'd say that for the most part, Pit Snake makes the most sense to use in an aggro rogue. Rogues that are using this card for a 1 mana 2/1 and not for like destroy any minion damaged by this minion. This is like if you want to use this card, this card text should be like a very small side effect, and you should be wanting to play Pit Snake on turn 1 just for a beater, and this is just like a small effect. I wouldn't consider putting Pit Snake in some kind of like oil rogue or control rogue and trying to like ambush minions with it. It's more of just I want to play a minion on turn 1, and then because most rogues start playing minions by turn 3, and that's why their deck is so smooth, because they don't have 1 and 2 draw minions, and then every card is useful at every point in the game. It's like super weak. It's a one health minion. A lot of classes can just kill with their hero power, and classes that can't, it might be better against. But I definitely recommend using this card in a deck that you want to use a 2 mana 1 mana 2/1. And there's already a better one, I think, the Pirate, that makes the weapon like 2 attack or something. Unearthed Raptor, Battlecry, choose a friendly minion, gain a copy of its Death Rattle effect. I do want to bring up another point about Pit Snake. and that's rogues don't have good 1-drops, so that's definitely a huge plus for this card because it's a card with low competition in the slot, whereas this is like the opposite. Rogues have great 3-drops and SI Agent and stuff. Van Cleef. So this card, while it's like it looks on paper stronger than Pit Raptor, maybe 3-mana 3/4, and it's as strong as Spider Tank and the sisters, Fiola and Idis, and it has like a nice little battle cry. But rogues have a hard time using, like there's not a lot of death rattle minions for rogues generally end up playing like high threat, high power minions because they can protect them so well with their removal. There's a lot of competition. I wouldn't say this card even comes close to SI Agent as far as how strong it is, even though 3-mana 3/4 is already pretty good. If you want to play it on curve, it's going to be hard to find a minion, a friendly minion with a death rattle, and if you want to play it like say late game, it's kind of hard for rogues to run death rattle. I'm trying to think if there's like a particular minion that's super good with, like Blood Mage maybe get an extra card, Loot Hoarder get an extra card, Sludge Belcher get extra slime. I wouldn't say it's too good. I have like a card, Mount Raptor I think is maybe the best card I like so far. Maybe Desert Camel after. This card's okay. Keeper Uldaman. Keep in mind, I am doing constructed card reviews, so your cards have to be very, very competitive for them to be good. Almost anything is usable in Arena, but for the most part, if we go by like last patches and stuff, like which TGT cards are used, very few cards make it into top constructed decks for a reason. Tunnel Trogg, when you overload, gain +1 attack per locked mana crystal. So I think Shamans could really use like minions, early game minions with high health and low attack, because Shamans, it's so weak to Paladin, and that's the problem with Shaman right now. It's just so weak to Paladin, and it's not so good overall either, but it's super weak to Paladin, and having a 1/3 minion is very good against Paladin. It has to compete with Zombie Chow in this slot, but it might or might not be better than Zombie Chow. A side effect of this card is you're more incentivized to use Feral Spirits, which is a very good anti-Paladin card, even though it's not a good card in general. It's very good against Paladin, so yeah, you could see Shamans making a move to be, say, better against Paladin, running Tunnel Trogs and Feral Spirits, maybe even some Zombie Chows as well. Might be too much, though, early game. Keep in mind, when you overload, you could overload up to 2 turns, your next turn and your current turn, so if you cast 2 Feral Spirits in a row or something like that, you get this up to 5/3 in 2 turns. Everyfin is awesome. Give your minions +2/+2, cost 1 less for each Murloc you control. For the most part, it's +2/+2 is really strong as core master effect that works for everything. And even if you don't count this, it costs 7. It might be a little bit too expensive. This costs 5. It'd be pretty good. I'd say it's much better than Bloodlust at 5. But for the most part, you can expect to have 0 Murlocs out. I mean, if you're actually running a Murloc deck, but at that point, I don't know. Murloc decks are not so good, and at 7, this effect is maybe a little bit too expensive. But, this kind of effect is so good for Shaman. It's also excited about Thunderbluff Valiant, and this actually buffs your totems as well. It's not like Bloodlust where it's just like you have to kill them with face damage. It makes all your 0/2 totems 2/4 for like every turn from there on, so I wouldn't be surprised if this card, like, when it does find a home in a deck, it's actually in a deck with 0 Murlocs. That'd be pretty funny, actually. People just think it's good enough for 7 mana. But I don't actually think that the Murloc part matters that much. I mean, I guess, yeah. There's some new Murlocs, right? Maybe you can reevaluate after seeing the new Murlocs. Rumbling Elemental, 4 mana, 2/6. After you play a Battlecry minion, deal 2 damage to random enemies. So this is one of the very dangerous minions to leave up, kind of like Knife Juggler and Flamewaker in a way. Yeah, it's kind of like a juggler, right? It's a Knife Juggler because Knife Juggler is like per minion, this is only Battlecry minion, but it's a 2/6 for 4. There is some contention for 4-drop slots in Shaman, but 4-drop is not like a huge thing in Shaman. There's pretty much just neutral stuff like Shredder. And I guess one thing about Rumbling Elemental is Shaman cards, especially mid-range Shaman, they use tons of Battlecry cards like Drake, Fire Elemental. I'm not sure if there's smaller things than Battlecry, but things that after 4 mana there's a lot of Battlecry minions. I'm tempted to say this is a good card just because if there's any precedence in Hearthstone looking at other cards like Knife Juggler and Flamewaker, these effects are very powerful, and 4 mana for 2/6 is kind of decent, sticky, goes very well at Flame Tongue Totem, things like that, or Defender of Argus, this guy after. And he's a high threat and hard kill. I actually think this is a good card, Rumbling Elemental. I would expect him to find home in mid-range Shaman. Dark Peddler, Battlecry Discover, 1 cost card. Wait, I think I'm just confused. I thought that this card was a 1/2 the last time I looked. It's like it got changed. But I don't care. I guess, like, looking at this card, I was gonna say it's not good. I thought it was a 1/2, but maybe 2/2 is better. Anyways, discovering minions for Warlock, you get some very good 1-drops: Flame Imp, Void Caller, or Void Walker, and then Power Whelming and Mortal Coil. Otherwise, you're just going from the neutral minions from there on. One of the things that is bad about Dark Peddler is you don't want to draw cards early as a Zoo deck, as an aggro deck that would want to use Dark Peddler, because you know your hero power makes it so that you don't run out of cards later, so you'd rather life tap later and just play powerful cards. Like, you don't want to play Novice Engineers and Loot Hoarders as a Warlock, because you already have that hero power. So I think like some of it is that the battle cry is kind of redundant. As a 2/2, it's much more feasible just because the card's fairly powerful, but I'd still say it's pretty still far from strength from a really good 2-drop like Haunted Creeper, very sticky. Oftentimes it's like they just need something to stick. Egg, Haunted Creeper, and Knife Juggler is just so powerful. So ultimately, I guess I don't feel like Dark Peddler is super strong either way. Could do some cool things during mana curve though, like not use a lot of 3-drops. That way you can do 1-drop, 2-drop, and then 2 and a 1 on turn 3. It's definitely a Zoo card, not a Handlock card. Curse of Rafaam. Give your opponent a curse card while they hold it. They take 2 damage on the turn. And this is the curse that I want to bring up. Just takes 2 mana to use it. That way it gets rid of your hand. The cool thing about this is it's like a 2 mana card that does 2 damage no matter what. It'll take 2 damage. So you can kind of think of it as a burn spell. 2 mana for 2 damage, which is obviously really bad, but then it takes their opponent 2 mana. So I don't know if it's better to think about it as, say, 0 mana for 2 damage spell to the face, because you're taking 2 mana, but your opponent has to spend 2 mana themselves after. You know, ultimately you can just play a 2-drop, and there generally has to be a response. Like if you play a Juggler, there has to be a War Axe or a Wrath or something. That still takes their 2 mana. You know, there's some upsides is that this could be used as burn as well, and also, you know, sometimes like they can choose not to use their 2 mana, in which case it's better for them. Like you can trade mana as Zoo. Overall, though, I don't think this is a strong 2-drop. It's more of a maybe a later game, or trying to find like a good spot. Like, you know, I thought this card was better than I read and thought about it more. It doesn't seem that good overall now after thinking about it more, but I definitely think it's interesting. It's not a lot of cards to compare Curse of Rafaam to right now. I guess I've said like some of the things. Mostly I wouldn't play this on turn 2 over a minion, but then again, you know, Zoo needs some reach sometimes. It can be used as burn at the end, and if you're using it kind of like in the mid game, maybe like instead of a tap or something on turn 5 or turn 6, it takes their mana, so you can lock down their key turns with it and maybe force them to take 4 damage or something instead of 2. Reliquary Seeker. If you have 6 other minions, gain +4/+4. So you have to have a full board when you play this, or full board and then play this for the full board. 6 minions in the 7. It's very hard to have that, but then in a way, Warlock has probably the best chance of pulling it off. Implosion, a lot of synergy with Implosion. If you Implosion on turn 5, if you get lucky, you can probably even like pull off both effects on the same turn. With Haunted Creeper, has a lot of synergy with Sea Giant if you're willing to build like a whole deck around this. But for the most part, Zoo's like already like that. 1 mana for a 5/5 is just so powerful tempo-wise if you can get this effect off. Yeah, I would think that you have to do something like Imp Game Boss, Haunted Creeper, Implosion. Even then, you know, people mostly are gonna say like win more, because yeah, it does almost feel like you have to you have to win more in a way, but it's hard to have 6 minions on board. But sometimes your 6 minions can just be 1/1s. So okay, so I guess ultimately I'm going to say this card is not so good, because there's better cards if you have 6 minions. And there's already a lot of good cards if you're that many minions, and this is too like black and white. You know, like Sea Giant slowly gets better. Things like the Impaler, you only need 4. You know, and there's other cards like Enhanso Mechano that slowly get better as you get more minions, but it's not just like black and white, as in you have to have either 6 or it just doesn't do anything. I think like looking at it from that perspective, you know, what is Sea Giant? It's like 12 for So if you had 6 minions, it'd be 6, but it works for opponent's minions. No, Sea Giant's 10. If you had 6 minions, play Sea Giant, it would be at 4. Okay, I mean, yeah, it's not that good. I wouldn't compare it favorably to Sea Giant. So Obsidian Destroyer, 7 mana, 7 Dr. Boom. So this is basically a common card, Dr. Boom. And this, I know I wasn't really going to talk about Arena, but or like for like say budget players, but you know, one of the things about Control Warrior is that people want to play Control Warrior, and it's hard to have all the legendary cards for Control Warrior, and kind of like Arena where it's kind of bad. So, you know, to some degree, it's probably like one of those cards, because this card's actually fairly competitive. It's not that much worse than the other big cards, but I feel like it probably is worse than the big legendaries. 1/1 with Taunt's much better at that point in the game than people would give it credit for. It's not just like a 1-mana 1/1 Taunt, no one would play that, but you know, late game like Sonaris, these tokens are really annoying because people are counting for lethal at that point, and like it's like a free thing that comes with a big minion. But then, you know, if ultimately if you're still comparing to Dr. Boom and Baron Geddon and Grom and stuff like that, it might not compare too favorably. I mean, definitely I've been wrong on this before. Like Shield Maiden is so surprisingly strong, and what's Hogger? 6 mana 4/4. You know, this card actually, like, the more I think about it, actually seems really strong. Because when you're playing Control Warrior, playing aggro decks, it pretty much forces like Tempo Mage and stuff like that, and aggro decks will kill this minion, and a lot of those tempo aggro decks or tempo decks is not using big game hunter, so they actually have to kill Obsidian Destroyer. Like when you play Dr. Boom against the aggro deck, they're probably just going to race you and ignore Dr. Boom, but it's hard to ignore this guy because it generates a taunt every turn, and the taunt itself is protecting you and protecting the Destroyer. And if you look at Hogger, it's so much better than Hogger, and Hogger's like been used before just because that effect is so strong at the end of every turn. Like you're paying 1 more mana for +3/+3, even though it's weak to Big Game Hunter, and you're getting a slightly worse minion every turn. But you know, it's pretty good. I'm curious about it. I'd be willing to experiment with it. I wouldn't say it's just strictly worse. There's bolster and stuff as well. Cursed Blade, 1 mana 2/3 weapon, double damage dealt to your hero. This is like really bad. I'm gonna talk about from constructed, but in constructed you cannot afford to use Cursed Blade because it has 3 durability, so it doesn't even go away for 3 turns if you're swinging all the time. Double all damage out. So this card definitely can't be using Control Warrior because there's already Fire War Axe for 1 more mana. 32 is better than 2/3 probably for weapon. You can't like double all damage dealt to your hero. Maybe Aggro Warrior I could see using this just because Aggro Warrior doesn't care. I'm going to just completely rule this out on Control Warrior or any kind of slow warrior because I feel like it just doesn't make sense at all. You know, life is your resource as a warrior. The more life you have, the better. You can really utilize life with cards like Brawl, with cards like weapons. You know, you can't just double all damage dealt to your hero. It's not even that good. But in an aggro warrior, maybe, because aggro warrior doesn't care. And 1 mana for 2/3 takes a lot of board control if you're going to follow it up with pirates like Bloodsail Raider and Dread Corsairs after, and Frothing Berserkers after, and you know, at that point it's just like 1 mana. It's so cheap. Fire War Axe, you can't play it, like you can't do Fire War Axe in 2 minions kind of because it's like the 2-drop slot kind of. So yeah, I can see us being used in aggro warrior. I would not use in Control Warrior. Take like 8 damage for a leper now. Oh my god. 3 mana for 3/4 Fierce Monkey. This is actually good. I think it might be better than Blackwing Technician, even though it's a 3/5, just because it's a taunt and there's no like requirement for dragon. It's like a fairly easy card. Warriors actually don't have that many things in the 3-drop slot. It's like it doesn't have a whole lot of competition. Warriors just don't have too many good minions, and you see a lot of people taking out Acolyte of Pain right now just because of all of the fatigue and stuff. And Fierce Monkey is a pretty cool. It's a fairly strong card in a Control Warrior. Pretty good. Is this power creep? It could be power creep. Like feels like better than, like maybe better than other 3 drops. I don't know why it's a beast, but you could get it from a web spinner.